Hi, I'm Tom Migot from Tom Migot Photography, and welcome to this series where we learn about Photoshop step by step. In a previous episode, we discovered one of the selection tools called the Marquee tool. Well, today we're going to discover another selection tool, and it's called the Lasso Tool. The Lasso Tool can be found on the left side in your toolbox, just underneath the Marquee tool. And you notice it has this lasso symbol on it. And when you click on it, very much like the Marquee tool, you notice that you have three variants for this tool. The first one is called the Lasso Tool, which I like to call it the Freeform Lasso Tool, and we'll see in a second why. Then the second type of lasso tool is the Polygonal Lasso Tool, and you may guess by its name what it will do. And then the last one, very often and sadly forgotten, is the Magnetic Lasso Tool. You will also notice that a keyboard shortcut for the Lasso Tool in general is the L key, which means that when we want to go to the Marquee tool, like we learned the last time, you press M key. If you want to go to the Lasso Tool, you press the L key. And if you want to switch back and forth between the different types of Lasso Tool, just simply hold the Shift key while pressing the L key and you just navigate through. So today, to illustrate how the Lasso Tool works, I'd like to create a document, and I'm going to then create a shape, and we're going to see how the Lasso Tool works around this. So let's create a new document, and we do Control N or Command N on a Mac. And it's just a white document here, and I'm just going to go to 8-bit, and I'm going to click OK. For those of you who are new to this series, you hear me talking about shortcuts. The reason is Photoshop is extremely powerful, and there are a lot of things that we can do in it that do not have a menu. So the only way to access those functionalities is to actually use your keyboard and doing keys combinations. So, but do not despair. As you know, with every episode that I've ever published on YouTube since 2012, I've always created an article on my blog on tommigotphotography.com, and you have the link in the description underneath the video. And for this series where we learn about Photoshop, I create an article and I give you the list of all the shortcuts, the keyboard shortcuts that I mentioned in the episode that work both for PC and for Mac. So here we are in our document. I'm just going to zoom in, so Control Command 0 here to just bring it up. And the first thing I'm going to do, interestingly, is create the shape. And I want to do this using the Marquee tool. And I'm going to start with a rectangular Marquee tool. So I'm just going to make a big rectangle like this. And I'm going to extend this selection with an ellipse. So to do this, I'm just going to do Shift M to switch to the elliptical Marquee tool, and I keep holding my Shift key here because I want to extend the selection like we saw in the previous episode. And I'm going to make it even more interesting and extend this selection. Now I just want to go back to the rectangular Marquee tool. Here we go. And I keep the finger on the Shift key just to extend, and I'm going to create a little square or rectangle here. And now I'm going to do what I did many times in previous episode, is I'm going to fill that selection with some color. So to do that, we go to the Edit, Fill, or Shift F5, and we're going to use the foreground color, which is red today. So I'm just click OK, and I'm going to deselect this, Control Command D. So here we are, we have this shape, and if I wanted to select this shape, I could certainly do it with a Marquee tool. After all, I used the Marquee tool to create it, but I would need to go back and forth between the rectangular and the elliptical Marquee tool, and it might not be that easier. And remember, in Photoshop, and you will discover this throughout the episodes that are to come, is there are many ways of achieving the same result in Photoshop, and it's the journey to get to your final result is determined by the easiness of the task. So because here the Marquee tool is useful, but it might not be the best choice, well, let's see how the Lasso tool actually compares. So go to the Lasso tool with the L key, and we're just going to use the first one, you know, the standard Lasso tool, the one I like called Freeform. The way it works is that you click and then you drag, and you can make any shape you want, hence the name Freeform Lasso Tool that I give it. And then when you're happy with your selection, you just need to go back to your initial point and release the mouse. That's one way of closing your selection. Another way of closing your selection is you start with your selection, and then when you're happy and all you want is just a straight line to your starting point, just release the mouse key and it will make a straight line all the way to your starting point. So you notice that we're talking about selection here, and I like to consider the Lasso tool as a selection tool, just like the Marquee tool, simply because they enable you to create a selection and also by that share a lot of similarities in terms of the option. You may notice here inside the Lasso tool, we have exactly the same options we discussed in the previous episode to define the type of selection. So whether you create a new selection every time, or you extend your selection, or you subtract it, or you make an intersect with selection. So it's exactly the same. You will also notice that we have feather and refine edge option, which could be found in the Marquee tool. We didn't talk about those two options previously, and we're not going to cover this in this episode today, but I think it's going to be the next episode, simply because those two options really deserve an episode just for themselves. So all that to say that your Marquee tool and your Lasso tool will do the same thing. It's just the journey to achieve it will be different. And therefore, when you move your cursor inside the zone here, the selection zone, you notice you have the same cursor as before when we saw with the Marquee tool. And if you click, you can move the boundaries of your selection. Remember, you're not moving the content of your selection, you're actually moving the boundaries. So that is for the Lasso tool. So is this tool the right one to make our selection here? Well, I could click here and start dragging, and you notice I'm not doing very well, and to be honest, I didn't drink whiskey this time. I just had a beer, but still, it's not practical, and I'm with a mouse here. I will need to zoom quite a lot. It's not easy to get a straight line, to be honest. So clearly this tool is not going to do a good job. And it's not to say that the Lasso tool is not a good job at all. Sometimes, and you will see in future episode, there is a need to actually make a quick selection without being without much precision. And so you just want to go around an object and just select it quickly. And that Lasso tool is brilliant for that. So now let's see the next type of Lasso tool, and that's going to be the Polygonal. Well, as I said, as its name implies, and you can see the little cursor now, we have some kind of a lasso, but it has some angles to it. Well, because it's going to define a selection as a polygon. So the way it works is that you click once, you can leave, you don't need to hold it, and you just move your mouse and you obtain a segment, so a line, and you can define the length of that line and the orientation of that line. And in fact, I'm going to give you a tip right away with regard to the orientation. You see, I move around and you can really define every single angle you want to go with. But if you actually press the shift key while doing that, your segment, your line will only move each 45 degrees. So that might be interesting if you want to make a selection and you want to make sure that your lines are actually going to be 90 degrees. And so the way it works is you have click once to start your segment. When you're happy with it, you click a second time, and that will make a point. And then you can create another point, and you click each time you want a point. When you want to close your selection, either you go all the way to the starting point, and you notice this little circle appearing under the cursor. That is to say that if you actually press on the mouse now, if you click on it, it will close your selection. Another way of closing your selection is you start making your selection like this, and when you're happy with it, you can just double click and it will make a straight line all the way to the end. Another way to close, so 3 ways to close your selection, is to start the same. So you start with a selection, here we go, and then when you're happy with it, just press and hold the Control Command key, and you notice now we suddenly have the little circle underneath the cursor, and now either you click on the mouse or simply press enter and it will close your selection. Another interesting thing to know about this tool is when you start making a selection, sometimes at one point you may realize that you went too far. Maybe I didn't want one of my last spot, this one, to be so low in the document, and you'd be tempted to just press escape, and if you do that, well, you lose everything and you get back to the previous selection. But maybe Instead of doing escape, what you can do is you do your selection, and then until you get a mistake, you went too low. Well, what you can do is press the backspace key, so the delete key. And by doing that, you basically delete the last time you clicked with the mouse. And you notice, up, here we go. And so you can basically delete and basically resume wherever you want to. So that's just a nifty trick to remember. A last trick with this lasso tool, this polygonal lasso tool, is you start making a selection with angles and lines, and at one moment you wish you had the freeform lasso tool. Well, one way of doing that is now you actually press and hold the Alt or Option key on the Mac, and you click with the mouse and you hold it down, and now you notice that the cursor has changed, and I now have a freeform lasso tool until I release the Alt key. And once I release the Alt key, suddenly the cursor logo changed, and I'm back to my polygonal lasso tool. So that's just a few things to know about the polygonal lasso tool. So let's see if that lasso tool, this polygonal lasso tool, will enable us to make the selection of our shape. So I'm deselecting all this. So I'm clicking here at the corner, and I could just very quickly go here. But suddenly, if I zoom in, well, in fact, I realized that I should have zoomed a little bit because it's not perfect. But anyway, you get my point. If now I want to carry on along the edge of that oval, well, here I'm going to lose some red, and here I'm going to have too much white. So I realized that in order to get a nice selection, I would actually need to get a smaller line at a time, and that's going to take quite some time. So while it's doable to make the selection using that polygonal lasso tool, clearly this is not an easy way. It's going to be quite tedious, it's going to take quite some time. So polygonal lasso tool, brilliant if you want to make a selection that is a polygon, has a polygonal shape. Well, let's see the final type of lasso tool to see if that one would actually enable us to do the job easier. So the magnetic lasso tool. You notice that the cursor logo now, it's a lasso tool with some angle, so remind us of the polygonal lasso tool. But now it has this little horseshoe symbol that, you know, as everybody knows, symbolize a magnet. So the way this tool works, and it's extremely powerful, is definitely my favorite of all the lasso tool variation. It works on the contrast. So it will analyze a zone where you're in, and it will actually spot the difference of contrast, and it will select the zone according to that change of contrast. So let me show you the zone. You notice here at the top we have 4 options here. The first one is the width, and that's going to be the zone that is going to be analyzed by the tool, where the contrast information is being analyzed. And to really see that dimension, that surface that is being analyzed, because here it says 49 pixels and that's not very explicit. Well, to see it better, you could just press the cap key, and when you press the cap key, suddenly your cursor changes and really shows the zone that is being analyzed. And so if I'm going here, for example, that would mean that 50% of my zone would be on the red side and 50% would be in the white. And the diameter of that circle surface would actually be 49 pixels. I could increase and reduce that width, and I could simply go at the top of the menu and change that value. Or, as we like shortcuts in Photoshop, you could just use the open and closing bracket. So the open bracket will reduce its size and the closing one will extend the width. Then we were talking about contrast, and that's not a surprise then that the next value after the width is going to be the contrast. The value is between 0 and 100%. 100% means that the analysis of the contrast will only care for highly contrasted zone. So in our case, obviously it's going to be very contrasted because we have purely a red, plain red color against plain white. So there is no ping, there's no variation there. So by selecting 100, it will spot it. But let's imagine you would have a zone where you have really subtle changes of contrast, and if you only had 100% at contrast, well, the tool is not going to do such a good job as selected the zone that you'd like. And so maybe going down to 25% or 10% contrast, it will help the tool pick up on those little nuances around the contrast. Then the next option, frequency, we're going to see this in a second. And I go to this one where you will see this option very often throughout the tools here in Photoshop that basically represent the stylus if you work with a graphic tablet. Basically, it's to do with the pressure that you apply to the stylus. And so the more pressure you apply to it, the less the less wide the zone for the analysis is going to be, and the less pressure you put, then you're going to be at the value that you define for that width. So that's how it works. So now, in order to show you how the tool really works, now we cover the theory, I'm just going to press the cap key again just to remove this zone. And here basically I'm going to click here in the corner, and what you notice is that we suddenly created a pointer, and as I move my mouse, I don't need to press on it, I just move it. You notice that the tool is creating a lot of pointers all along the edge of my rectangle here, of my shape, simply because he identified the contrast between the red and the red edge against the white background, and that's how it works. And let me show you how great that tool is. Look how quick I am, and it's actually selecting all the edges of my document. Oh, I didn't do a good job here. I was a little bit greedy here as well, but you get my point. It's very good. It goes very quick. You notice all those pointers, right? When I do this, look. Well, those pointers, the slower you go, the closer the pointers are going to be. But then the number of pointers that you're going to have is due to the frequency. So if I was to actually reduce that frequency to 10, for example, well, then look, the space between, even if I'm going slowly, you notice that we don't have that many pointers. And so in my mind, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see the point of having a low frequency. I've always dealt with high frequency to have a maximum of pointers, simply because the more pointers you will have, the more precise your selection going to be. So, and it works exactly the same way as the polygonal lasso tool, meaning that if you notice that you didn't do a good job with the pointers, like let's say like this, for example, and I'd like to delete a few pointers, instead of just doing escape, I can press the delete key or the backspace key to just delete the last pointer. But my advice to you is just follow the pointers that as you're deleting them, follow them with your cursor, just to make sure that you don't create new unwanted pointers until you get to the pointer that you want to resume from, and then you can just carry on and finish your selection. So here, that tool seems to be brilliant, but there are a few things that we need to bear in mind. And to show you, I need to actually zoom and deselect whatever selection it was. So let me zoom in. Something that you may notice with this tool is that it's to do with the corners. The tool may have trouble identifying correctly the corners of your selection. So if I'm clicking here, and let me just escape for a second and increase the frequency back to 100. So I'm clicking and I'm dragging, and so far so good, and then up here, so far so good. So we'll say here, up. You notice this? Let me zoom in. You notice that now here at the bottom, I'm not moving my cursor just so you guys don't get confused with extra pointers, but look at the bottom between the end of the curve and the beginning of my rectangle. You notice how there's a little bit of white here that's been added to my selection. Well, that's something that happens very often when you deal with corners. And so one cool trick for you, my advice is, so I'm deleting the pointers here. Let me up, delete, delete, delete. Delete, is to actually go all the way to the inside of your corner and click on the mouse and then carry on your selection. So here I didn't do such a good job. So I would need to actually zoom in more. Up, here we go. Let me zoom in. So you see, I'm going to create a pointer right here, and now I can carry on up. and I'm like this. If I zoom out, you see I'm sure to have really everything that I want in my selection. So all that for saying that you can add pointers whenever you want to by simply clicking yourself. So, and that forces the creation of a pointer. So here I'm not doing such a good job. One thing that you need to know with the with this tool is just like the polygonal tool. Let me escape this because that's not a good selection at all. But look at my line. Sometimes you're using this magnetic lasso tool and it's brilliant, but you may want to actually temporarily switch to the polygonal lasso tool. Well, to do this, you press the Alt key, you hold the Alt key and you click once, and suddenly you notice that the cursor now changed into the polygonal lasso tool, and then it will work, but just keep holding the Alt key. You don't need to, but that would be my advice. So hold the Alt key like this, you remember that you're dealing with a temporary lasso tool. So you can create your selection using the polygonal, and then once you want to revert back to the initial magnetic lasso tool, just release the Alt key, click once, and then the next time when you move the mouse, you notice that you're back to your favorite magnetic lasso tool. What if you wanted to go from the magnetic lasso tool to the freeform lasso tool? Well, you use the Alt key as well, but so you press and hold the Alt key, but this time when you click with the mouse, you keep the mouse down and you drag, and suddenly you notice that the cursor now changed into the freeform lasso tool. And then when you want to stop, just release the Alt key and you notice that it automatically created a pointer, and then you just carry on with your magnetic lasso tool. So one last thing that I'd like to mention with regard to the magnetic lasso tool is that it will only work with 8-bit document. What I mean by this is that when you create a new document, you notice that here next to the color mode you have 8-bit. If you click on this, you notice that you can select either an 8-bit or 16-bit or 32-bit document. So if you actually go on 8-bit, you notice it works. On 16 it works, and on 32-bit, if I create this new document, you notice that I have my magnetic lasso tool, and now the cursor tells you no, you cannot use it. So if you faced with this situation, now you know why you cannot use the magnetic lasso tool. So that's just a cool trick to know. I know there's a lot of functionalities here that I'm covering, but you know, remember, go to the article and you can review the little shortcuts and key combinations that's going to remind you what you can do with this tool. So clearly the magnetic lasso tool is extremely powerful tool. At the end of the day, what you need to understand about whether it's the Marquee tool or the lasso tool, there are different ways of doing things in Photoshop, and it's all about finding the proper tool that's going to facilitate the job at hand. So here clearly for me the magnetic lasso tool was the best tool to do the selection of that shape. So I hope you found this informative. Let me know in the comments. Until next time, this is Tom Migot saying if you like it, well, capture it and enjoy it in Photoshop. Ciao.